Welcome to Ask Earl Anything. This is the show where your questions make the show. And this week I have a few questions, a couple really good questions, maybe 3 good questions. So let's get started. First question comes from Kurt Johnson. Kurt Johnson asked this question a couple weeks ago. Can you discuss drumhead choice? Remo ambassadors, calfskin heads, Evans hydraulics, Aquarian Vintage. What are the differences you hear between them? Kurt brings up a great question. What heads? Now, for me today, I've been a Remo player for a long time, but I've played Evans and I've played Aquarian. And I've always been trying to go for that vintage calfskin type sound. Now, the only time I ever played a calfskin head was in college. We actually had some calfskin heads that were hanging around in the percussion room at Jersey City State back in the day. Always wished I took one and put it on a drum, but I wouldn't have known what to do with it at 19 or 20 or 21. Just had no clue about what I was dealing with back then. But getting that calfskin sound was something that started to happen at the end of the 70s. And the first company to try to get that calf-like sound out of a drumhead, not plastic, was Remo. Remo was going for that fiber, they called them fiber skin heads, going after that calfskin head sound. There was another company at the time that had a drumhead, and I forgot the name of the company. It wasn't Canopus, like the drums, but it was another Cana something, Canasonic I think they were called. And they had kind of like a Kevlar kind of head surface. And I had one of those. They weren't as strong as Kevlar, trust me. They were not like the Kevlar heads that you find on the Remo drums. But they were going for that calfskin head sound. And a lot of jazz guys wanted that calfskin head sound. So real calfskin heads are really hard to keep in tune. And that's what drummers found in the 50s and the 40s. So when Remo and, of course, Evans created those two heads, they both made them about the same amount of time, around the same time in the late 50s, early 60s. The plastic head was weatherproof, and that was the big thing. That's why the Remo heads were called Weather King drum heads, because it didn't matter if it was rainy or it was humid or hot or cold. It didn't really matter. Your heads were going to stay pretty much in tune because they were plastic. So Remo heads became kind of the standard, and plastic heads became the standard. But those of you that have ever tried to get that sound of a skin of an animal versus plastic, there is quite a difference. So today, Aquarian's got a set of heads called Modern Vintage that I've played on. I actually have some videos of me playing on the Modern Vintage heads. And the Modern Vintage are kind of calf-like. Okay? I would recommend getting the Modern Vintage, not the Deep Vintage. Deep Vintage are extremely 2-ply and very deep sounding. So let's go into the types of sounds. Jazz guys like to get a little ring out of the drums. That's what they're going for, that little more ring out of the drums. Now this drum today has an ambassador on it. Ambassador 10-inch tom head. Ambassadors are single ply, 7mm heads. That's more what the sound of drums sounded like in the 40s and 50s and 60s, because drummers had to tune those heads up, and they over-tuned them because they knew they were going to slack down as the gig went on. So you heard a lot of jazz recordings, plus you got a better bounce off of a tight head. The looser the head is, the less of the bounce you get. Okay, this is a 14-inch ambassador, and it's tuned down a little bit, and you get that. It's a lot harder to get pull the doubles off of it. If it's tighter, the doubles come more naturally. Now, it's not impossible to get doubles off it, but the more slack it is, the harder it is to pull the doubles out. Now, the sound of drums changed considerably by the 70s. Everybody was trying to get that deep, thuddy sound. And the way they were doing that was either going with no head on the bottom, or they were tuning the heads down and putting tape on the drums and all kinds of muffling and stuff. And one of the guys who had a really deep sound was Steve Gadd, and he used the Evans hydraulic heads back in the 70s. The Evans hydraulic heads were 2-ply with a thin layer of oil in between. And they had a really dead sound, kind of like a cardboard box. And I've played the Evans hydraulic heads back in the 70s and early 80s, played them. I used them on some Vistalite drums I had in the 90s and 2000s. They're really dead, and they're really flat sounding. Ambassadors, brighter, you can tune them up, get more of that jazzy, traditional jazzy sound we're used to hearing. They've got more of a mid-rangey thing, and I really like the sound of Remo Ambassadors. They sound great. Now, my main drum kit, my main Gretsch kit right now today has got Remo Emperors on it, which are 2-ply heads. 2-ply, 7 mils on each ply. But in the future, I'm going to be going to the vintage Ambassadors on that kit. I bought a set of vintage Ambassadors, and vintage Ambassadors have a 7 mil top ply and a 3 mil bottom ply, which so makes it a 2-ply head. As a matter of fact, the first Ambassador heads were 2-ply, 7 and 3. Okay, 7 and 3 gets you to a 10 mil head. Matter of fact, I may be wrong about the Ambassadors. I always do this too. I think the Diplomats may be the 7 mil and the Ambassadors might be the 10 mil head. So they kind of went with just one straight 10 mil ply. Okay? Because I always forget, Remo has 3 types of heads. Diplomat, the thinnest head they make for a batter. Ambassador is their medium weight, and the Emperors are their heavyweight. And then, of course, now you've got pinstripes and CS black dots and all those other heads. So I think that's right. So I think the Ambassador's a 10 mil head. The Diplomat's a 7 millimeter head, and the Emperor is 2 7 millimeter plies together. Okay? Gets confusing, but the 2 plies together does something to it. Makes it a thicker, punchier, fatter kind of sound. And I've always liked the Emperor heads. Coated Emperors are my favorites. But to be honest, the Ambassador head has got a certain sound to it, and I've been warming up to that Ambassador sound for years. And it started when I started playing the Aquarian Modern Vintage heads, trying to go after that calf sound. Now, the other heads that have that calf-like sound in the Remo family were the Renaissance heads. They were going for that calf thing, and then there was also the fiber skins. And the fiber skins were the first attempt at calf skin heads. And the fiber skin 2s I never played, but I played the fiber skin 3s. And the funny thing about the fiber skin 3s are just like the top of the djembe heads for the Remo djembes. It's kind of like a papery top over a plastic head. The Evans 56 heads are kind of in that same vein as the fiber skins. And I have an Evans 56 on my bass drum, on my 20-inch bass drum, Gretsch bass drum. And it has that kind of fiber skin quality to it. So there's a lot of cool heads out there, though. Hydraulics definitely is something you've got to love that sound. And once you buy a set of hydraulics, you know what I mean. You buy it and you play them and you go, wow, these are really dead. I don't know how Gadd did the things he did with those heads on, but all that crazy stuff he was doing back with Chick Corea on like Leprechaun or the Asia album and stuff, he was probably using the hydraulic heads. That was when he started really using those hydraulic heads. Right up through the Paul Simon One Trick Pony movie. He was still playing the Evans hydraulic heads. And then about the early 80s, he switched to Remo, and then you started seeing him with pinstripes, and today I think he may play Emperors or Ambassadors, I don't know which, but he plays a coated head today, Gadd. But yeah, heads, I don't know if I answered your question or not, Kurt, to be honest, but I think I covered a whole bunch of different heads there, though. My favorites today are, I'm a Remo player for the most part, but if Evans wants to come after me and give me heads, I'll play G1s or G2s. or the calf tones. The EC2s just don't seem to turn me on. Like, I was looking at some EC2s today because Sweetwater had a deal for like a 10, 12, 14 EC2 for like $30. And I'm actually looking for this little Gretsch kit to put a pinstripes on it. You're saying, well, why pinstripes? Well, pinstripes have a certain sound, and they've got that. They were the Remo attempt at the Evans hydraulic head. But theirs is a little brighter than the Evans hydraulic. Hydraulics are really dead. I mean, it's like thud. It's like hitting a cardboard box, literally. Had cool colors though, black and blue and red. You know, the blue ones were the coolest to me. I had a set of the blue ones on a set of drums once. I really liked those. Color heads always were cool. I will tell you the color heads I don't like are black. Black Mylar doesn't do anything for me, and sound-wise they sound different. I had a set of black pinstripes back in the 80s, and they were the worst sounding pinstripe heads I ever had. Now, I've played the clear pinstripes a lot, and they always sounded good to me. But the black pinstripes, yuck. And I never liked the black front resonator head on a bass drum. I have a couple of them, but I don't use them out very often. So yeah, I hear differences in heads. Totally hear differences. There's a difference from an Ambassador to an Emperor. Emperor's got the fatter sound, 2-ply thing. Ambassadors have got that mid-rangey thing with 1-ply. As your playing style grows and you get more sensitivity, an Ambassador makes a lot of sense. Sounds great under a microphone. Emperors just sound great on any drum. You could put Emperors on a real cheap drum kit, you know, one of those lower level drum kits, and they usually sound great on those drums. Just like G2s. Evans G2s are a 2-ply head. You put it on any cheap level drum kit, like the Catalinas or something, they always sound good on Catalina drums. Just fatter. Ambassadors, you need a good bearing edge and you need a good drum, and then they usually sound really good. Now, there's always exceptions to all rules, okay? But that's been my experience. Some guys really like the sound of clears. I was watching a Simon Phillips video today, and he always plays clear heads. I think he plays clear Ambassadors too, but he maybe play Emperors, I'm not sure. But he's a Remo guy. And his toms always sound bright and punchy. You know, when he's with Toto, he used to have that bright and punchy thing going on. That's why I think they're Ambassadors. But clear. Coated just dampens it a little bit, puts a little darkness to it, in my opinion. So I'm a guy that likes coated heads versus clear heads. But I am looking for this little Gretsch kit right here to have more of a little punchy, fat tom thing, because this is going to become like my working kit. I'm actually planning to bring it to my church. We play more of like an acoustic environment without mics. And I play on some big drums at church right now. I play on a Yamaha Stage Series kit from the 80s with the mahogany drums with pinstripes on them. 16 and a 12. Fat, really big sounding. I'm thinking about going to this kit because it's just a logistics thing in the church where we store stuff. But I don't know. I think this kit with some pins on it will sound really funky and kind of fusion-y like from the 80s, and that's what I'm kind of going for. And on this kit, I have a 18-inch EMAD, regular EMAD on it, and this kick always sounds good with the EMAD on it. I don't know what it is. Anyhow, love heads and I love trying heads, but that's kind of my take on the differences from those heads that you brought up there. I like the modern vintage heads, really nice heads. But they're not an everyday thing. They're kind of more of a jazz kind of head. But I did a whole bunch of covers in the in 2017 with those heads on it, so if you see some of my early drum covers, you go back in my catalog, you'll see me playing the modern vintage heads. Lately, I've been playing a lot of Remo Emperors and Ambassadors. This kit's got Ambassadors on it. All right, the next question, I believe it's from Michael. I have two questions from Michael Perry actually today. So this is off of one of my recent covers. I'm not even sure which cover it was. Oh, I think it was Anticipation. I did re-released Anticipation again for the third time. Carly Simon's Anticipation. And Michael asked the question, how come you don't use felt washers on your cymbals? Well, the truth of the matter is I do use felt washers, or I use these cymbal sleeves on the bottoms. But I think he's talking about the tops. Why don't I put the tops on with the felts? If you look on my other kit, I've got these cymbal crowns on the cymbal stands. The reason I don't use the felt washers, and I haven't been using the felt washers, has to do with I just like to be able to take my cymbals off and switch them out easy. It's kind of a Steve Jordan thing. If you ever watch Steve Jordan, some studio stuff of Steve Jordan, you'll see him switching stuff around a lot. Or even live he does this, and he doesn't use it. I also like the fact that the cymbal just kind of floats. You know? Now, one of the things I've learned is that these cymbal stands with this does float. Because this is an old Yamaha stand. And it's got a floating piece on it. It floats. But the ones that are one piece plastic, they don't float. They're just stiff. And they have a different sound on a cymbal. So this one kind of has more of a traditional floaty. Like the old days, the Ludwig cymbal stands had a metal piece that was kind of round. Then you put the felt washer on it. And then you had the plastic sleeve that went on the stand. And the cymbals just floated on there. Today you've got a really hard plastic sleeve and base, and they don't move. They're just stuck there. And I think they obstruct the cymbal. Again, I got another one. So both of my Yamahas have got this little movable piece, and then I've got a piece of rubber on here. But I like the cymbal to kind of float on the stand. It just sounds more natural to me. Okay, that's what I'm after. And one of the things I'm looking at is some of those Tama vintage, well, they're called Tama classic hardware, because I'm looking some really lightweight hardware to travel with. I've now gotten to the point where I'm 58 years old and carrying around 40 pounds of hardware just breaking my back. Can't do it anymore. So I'm looking to go back to cymbal stands I had when I was a kid. I had some of those flat bass stands. So that's where I'm going. Matter of fact, just to show you how far I am, I'm using an old stand on my drums lately. For the last 6 months I've been doing this. This is an old vintage style snare stand. And this sucker's light. It's really light, but it actually holds the drum really well. Now, this is not a Ludwig bass, I don't believe, or it's really 1950s Ludwig. I mean, I don't see any markings on it. My friend Alan Levine gave me this piece. But I had this part up top. And this is a Ludwig top, by the way. So this has got a Chicago Ludwig top with some kind of a bottom. But it's just so light. The snare sounds really nice on this stand for some reason. I think it has to do with the fact that it's not really obstructing the drum. The drum's not kind of tight in there, obstructed. You can take it out easily. So that's where I'm going with cymbal stands and snare stands, is I want something lighter to carry around. Okay, same with my hi-hat stand. So that's where I'm going with things. But that's the reason why I don't have the cymbal. It's just more of me being lazy in the studio and not want. If I want to change cymbals, it makes it easier to do. But I, as a rule, might have a top wing nut on here, but I don't really like to have it sandwiched where it's really tight, except for splash cymbals and chinas. When it comes to a china cymbal, I like to have it squashed, and I really like to have a splash cymbal that's squashed, which is why I've broken a few splash cymbals in my day, because when you clamp down on it, it's more likely to put cracks in the bell of the cymbal. So I like my cymbals to kind of float. That's kind of my thing. But that's a great question, Michael. Thank you for it. All right. My last question for this Ask Earl Anything comes from Michael Perry. I got it today, and this is the reason why I'm doing this today. He said, now this was my cover of Drum and Men. Now, my daughter Sandra and her husband Aaron bought me some great books for Christmas, and one of them is called Sitting In with the Big Band. Now, it's really a nice ensemble, jazz ensemble book, and it's not hard reading. It's probably high school grade reading level, okay? But it's got big band charts, and one of the charts was Drum Man, and Drum Man is an old Gene Krupa tune. Now, I did not really know this tune, to be honest, and the day I played it 5-6 times, I think. I was reading this chart. And actually I played it 4 times. There was a couple I played 5-6 times, but not many. The chart was really well written. And so I did a cover of Drum Man, I released it, and Michael Perry saw it and he asked this question. And here's the question. Just a question for your show. Do you think it takes away from drumming when you're looking at sheet music? I mean, it looks like you're concentrating on getting the note to note instead of enjoying the music. Buddy Rich never read music, as did many famous drummers. Just wondering, or perhaps it's just because I can't read music and I'm just jealous, laugh out loud. I don't think you're jealous, Michael, but thank you for saying that. I think a lot of drummers feel inferior because they don't read music. And by the way, I don't read music very well, to be honest. When I was in college, I struggled with reading music. Reading music was one of the things I struggled with the most. My ears get me by. And a matter of fact, when you are reading a drum chart, a lot of getting through a drum chart is your ears and knowing the form of tunes. Because on a drum chart, there's an introduction, there's a verse, okay, there's another verse. And as you see these markers here, it's delineating, okay, we're either repeating a verse or we're going to a new section. And when you see that, your ears help you know that, oh, we're coming into 35. I'm not sitting there looking at everything, but I'm hearing it. You also start to count the phrases. This has got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 bars. That's the verse. So you start to learn the form of the tune, 16 bars of playing, okay, playing time. Then you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's got a short little interlude, and there's a little hit on 2. That's what a chart does. It tells you where, it's a roadmap that shows you your way. I love getting a chart and being able to read a chart. That to me is so much fun. Now, am I really good at it? And I'm not. I don't usually get everything on the first pass. But the idea that I can look at a chart and know where I'm going on the chart and know where I'm supposed to go back to, because there's little signs like DSL coda, where you go back to the sign and then you come back to the next sign and you come back to the ending, or understanding the repeat signs, that's all part of reading drum charts, and it makes it fun. And playing jazz music, having a chart makes it easier for me, actually. But eventually, even when you're reading a chart, you're using your ears. So, did I have to use the chart to play this song? No, but if I was going to get it in a short amount of time, like 4 or 6 passes, and get it pretty close, the chart helps. Now, I don't write a chart out for most of the tunes I do, because most of the tunes I do are tunes from my past, or they're tunes that I'm listening to and I want to play. But if I'm doing a church gig at church, a lot of times I'll take the lead sheet for the church gig and I'll write some notes on it, so I make a makeshift chart so I know where I'm going with things. And that makes it easier for me to remember what I have to do at different sections of the tune. But I would say a good practice for musicians is to understand form. And form is understanding the idea of verse, chorus, bridge, or middle eights. A, B, C. Okay? So a lot of times you'll hear the form of a jazz tune will be A, B, A, which means you do the A section twice, A section, then you go to the B section, then you go back to the A section. And when you've got an AABA form, you're playing A section, B section, A section. And then you say solo on the A section, and then you play the A section. If the A section is 16 bars, you just keep playing 16 bars till you come back out, and you go back to the form of the tune, A, A, B, A, and out. Okay? That's helpful. Now, in modern music, it's verse, chorus, bridge, or it could be verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge. A lot of times you'll see that. Okay? Sometimes you'll have intro, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, chorus, chorus, double chorus. A lot of worship music's got that kind of a form. So understanding the form of the tune is really important. Even if you don't read music, it's important to know the form of the tune. So learning the basic form of the tune is probably just as important as knowing how to read the notes. I do not play every note on this chart. And a matter of fact, I'm going to use a tune I did on the front end of my Ask Earl Anything today and the back end called Ascendancy. It's a chart reading. It was a drum cover I did as a chart reading exercise, and I actually put the chart to follow along. The interesting thing about this chart reading exercise is I did it twice. The first time I played it with a little bit more of a rock flavor, and it had a little more rock pushes. It goes back and forth between rock and jazz on the whole chart, but it's got that form, and you're following the chart. But you can see that I'm interpreting the chart. I'm not playing the note for note. That's what you do with a chart. It's a roadmap. You use it to interpret. What's the important roadmap things? Solo 2 bars. Solo 2 bars with a hit on the second one. Okay? This hit's important. Whenever you see an accent over a hit, important. Usually when they write out a figure, ba, 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 da 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 ba. Ba 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 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 ba ba da da ba da da ba da da ba da 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 ba da ba. Then you're back into the time. That's this little section right here at 83. Those are the important things. Getting those hits. Ba 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 da ba. That's on the chart. That's where the chart helps you. So. Is a chart important to learn to read? I think it's important to learn to read. How good we get at it, that's a whole nother thing. But I would say learning basic rhythms and being able to get through a roadmap drum chart is really important if you want to do a lot of different types of gigs. And it's not a hindrance to me. It's a help. But Michael, what you caught me doing was reading the chart because I did not play that song a lot of times. It wasn't quite in my head yet. Once it gets in my head, I can really turn the chart off for the most part. And you will see some of the tunes where I'm reading charts where I eventually turn it off because I know the tune and I don't have to look at the chart anymore. But this book, Volume 1, Jazz Ensemble Play Along, excellent book for basic chart reading. And it's got some swing playing in it, it's got some rock playing, it's got some Latin playing in it, and it's a lot of fun. And I recommend it highly. It's not the hardest book. It's an easy book. I've been doing some harder stuff. All the Duke Ellington stuff I did last year where I had to play over top of the drummer too, those were tougher charts. They were tougher charts than these charts. And I've got another book she bought me, that my daughter bought me, that has got some tougher charts. And I'm looking forward to playing some of those tunes soon too. But yeah, I love the challenge of it. It's a lot of fun. But I do not read note for note. I'm reading the form of the tune. I'm reading the big picture hits. That's what I read in a chart. Anyhow, I'll put this tune I was talking about on the back end of this, and hope you guys enjoyed this Ask Earl Anything. Remember, your questions make the show. Enjoy being able to do the show, and I enjoy having guys watching my show. Thanks for watching, and Happy New Year. Have a great day. Bye.